This is March. It is also the first Monday in March, which means spring football is 2 weeks away. And we've almost got through all of the position groups, reviewing and previewing, but we're not quite there yet. So it is Monday, Podcast Daily. Bill Landis, Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward, and we've got to talk about the defensive line, which Bill, Berm and I both talked about it on Three Thoughts Thursday. I don't know, I won't speak for you. Outside the quarterbacks, this might be the most intriguing position group on the Ohio State roster.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. A ton of production lost, obviously, with the two ends going and the two starting tackles going. I think like players moving up that I'm definitely excited about. But I guess maybe I don't. Do we know entirely what they are? I'm not sure of that. Like I think like in spurts, some of these guys have played very well, and you've definitely seen the potential with a lot of the players who are going to be stepping up into larger roles this year. But it's not like a crazy large body of work for I don't know. I guess like everyone outside of perhaps Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry. So it's a bit of an unknown, but it's not like I don't know for me if like it's an unknown that's necessarily concerning, but it is interesting. I think interesting is the right word, and this feels like maybe the most turnover we've seen with this group too, probably since like I don't know, going into that 2018 season. So there's a lot to sort out here for sure.
Yeah, I mean they didn't have to go necessarily dip into the transfer portal, though they did, and we'll see what that looks like with Logan George and when practice starts in 2 weeks. And we've seen Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson and Edric Houston and Caden McDonald all play some meaningful football for Ohio State, but certainly not to the level of those four guys you mentioned. When you have to replace Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, Ty Hamilton, and Tyleik Williams all at once, Berm, like that is a lot to ask. Now, they might do it, but that's a bet on potential, even though we have seen those the next wave play a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's a lot of not just recruiting stars, experience, production. I mean, you lose everything at one time. And I think what it does to me is it really puts into focus the bizarre effect of losing Mitchell Melton and Hero Kanu at the same time, who were the guys that played a lot for Ohio State and had a lot of experience. And both those guys who were in a position to probably step into larger roles for the first time in their Ohio State career transfer out. And I don't really necessarily understand what motivated that when you look at their potential for playing time. But obviously Ohio State recruits very well. We know that. So you have guys behind that are waiting to step up that have a recruiting pedigree that at least makes you feel like, hey, they should be okay. But the reactions or the results of the last 2 years is that a lot of those recruiting pedigrees, those guys that we were waiting to see step up, never really got a chance to, because there was so much of a focus on Jack and JT and Ty. And so now you have a lot of recruiting like expectation, but we don't have any real results for these guys. And we've seen Kenyatta and Caden play well, and Caden McDonald played well in spurts, and Edric Houston is the lone 5-star on the roster on the defensive line. So you have expectations for him that are pretty high. But other than that, I mean, we don't know what you're going to get out of Dominic Kirks or Will Smith or even a guy like Logan George. And so you're looking for just anyone to step up. Ty Malone, who remains on the roster as the remaining tie on the defense at the defensive tackle. It's a triple tie, and now there's only one tie, which is unfortunate because it was really confusing because the TNT was really explosive. But I don't know. I mean, we talked about this last week, as you mentioned, Austin, and people were a little bit concerned because it seems like we're just nitpicking Larry Johnson. But I don't know how you look at the roster and the other guys that are leaving at other positions like linebacker or something. If you lose Cody Simon, but then you're replacing him with up-and-coming guys like Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles, and you have 5-stars coming in like Riley Pettijohn. You can go position by position and see that, hey, the next wave is probably going to be okay. And I think that it's very clear that the defensive line is the one spot where the question marks feel larger than the expectations for the returning guys.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it doesn't feel like nitpicking. I think if you're looking just purely at the numbers on the roster and the stars of the guys on that roster. The recruiting had dipped. This is not news that it's not something we hadn't talked about on signing days over the previous couple of years, that whatever the issues had been, whether that's changing NIL and the way that the recruiting process is played out, like they were not Larry Johnson or Ryan Day or Jim Knowles or whoever the collective group. We're not signing it as many defensive ends and defensive tackles, in my opinion, as they needed to. But that's looking ahead, and it certainly appears that Larry Johnson is intending to stick around and see this process through for what the post JT, Jack, Ty and Ty defensive line Rushmen group looks like. It's not entirely a nitpick on Larry Johnson, because he's earned the right to do that after what he did last year. There have certainly been times when it comes to the rotation, like I have evaluated Larry Johnson, maybe critically, maybe too critically for some people. I know that perception is out there, and I'm not pretending like it didn't happen. But if we're going to do the review part and be honest about the evaluation, Larry Johnson did an amazing job. And Ohio State's defense and the Silver Bullets, that was not all Jim Knowles during the postseason run. I mean, those guys found a way forward, I think, to work collaboratively and got things on the same page. And JT played at the highest level of their career. Tyleik Williams was awesome despite being banged up, and Ty Hamilton was always underrated. So, Larry Johnson did validate himself as one of the greatest position coaches of all time a year ago. And so then if you want to give him the benefit of the doubt that the group that he's put in place for 2025 is going to live up to those expectations and he's going to develop, that's fine. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just curious about how it's going to look, because he did do an awesome job last year. There's no mistaking that.
Yeah, he did. I would agree with anybody who said like the defensive line production prior to this like playoff run wasn't bad. Like a lot of teams would kill to have it, but it's just like there's a standard at Ohio State, and maybe it fell a little bit short of that. But those 4 games, the defensive line played out of its mind, and I think the defensive line played pretty well, probably post Oregon, not just post Oregon one, I should say, not just in those 4 playoff games. So like it was just all that talent, like kind of like all the talent, potential, projections, everything you had for those 4 guys, just kind of all came together at the exact right time, and they all played their best football in the postseason, which is a testament to them. And they're like backing it up, a lot of the guys, with what they did at the combine too, especially a guy like Tyleik Williams. But I think it's proof that like Larry Johnson, like there's still something there, right? He's been doing it a long time. I know he's into his 70s, but he got that group to play its absolute best, and that's not nothing. It's just going to be a real challenge to do it again with this younger / more inexperienced group. But I kind of like what they have. Maybe I wish they had a little more depth, but Burr mentioned like Hero Kanu and Mitchell Melton transferring. If they hadn't, then maybe I would feel even okay about that. Like I think Edric Houston is going to be awesome, and I think Edric Houston and Katie McDonald as a tandem, they're fairly young still, I guess, but that potential with them is through the roof. Like I think they could be as good as any tandem in the country long term. We'll see if they can hit that in their first year, and then like I'm excited to see what Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry do now that it's kind of their show. It's just going to be on Larry and his defensive line staff to really get that depth to kind of shine through, because you can't go through a season that Ohio State hopes to go through with only 4 or 5 defensive linemen really that you can count on. I think, if you look at the snap counts from this past season, there were 4 guys who dominated them, but I don't know that those guys play as well as they played in the postseason without, a couple of guys playing between 150 and 200 snaps at a fairly high level, or at least not at a level where there wasn't just this precipitous drop off once you put them into the game. So like that for me is the challenge for Larry Johnson this year, is like, can you find those bonus like 2 to 3 to 4 guys who can log that kind of snap count, but actually have those snaps be played well and productively, so that you don't get to the end of the year and Edric Houston's got 800 snaps under his belt because you had no other choice but to play him that much throughout the season.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. If we're looking back, I don't know that we've seen an 8-game stretch out of Larry Johnson's defensive line that was as good as a unit. I mean, we've seen individual performances, obviously, from Chase Young and the Bosa's in Joey in 2015, Nick in 2017, where you're like, man, that's that's pretty crazy. But the collective group played as well together in the last 8 games of the season for Ohio State as we've probably ever seen. Which is why what I said last Thursday was that I think that this year coming up is almost certainly going to be the most challenging that Larry Johnson's ever had at Ohio State to because of the unknowns, because of the inexperience, because of the positional challenges when you're talking about the defense changing a little bit. If you look at this roster, we expect Edric Houston to be inside alongside Caden McDonald, but the rest of the defensive, we've got Eric Mensah, Jason Moore, who maybe can rotate in there at defensive tackle. But at defensive end, you have like a 6'3", 230-pound Josh Mickens, or a 6'4", 230 or 440, 245-pound, Logan George, and Caden Curry. Very different body types. We don't have those just prototypical defensive ends that you had the last 8 years when you had Jack and JT, or the Bosa's, or Chase Young, or Tyquan Lewis, or Sam Hubbard, et cetera. Like, I think it's just going to be a much different year. And I'm excited to see how it goes, because we did see, and to what Bill said, like, obviously Larry Johnson is pretty darn good at his job. Like, he's not forgot how to coach his guys. He's not forgotten what works. I think that what we saw in the last half of the year was, for the first time in a while, the defensive staff being cohesive and the plan being aligned. And when I say aligned, I use that on purpose, because I think just the subtle differences that Ohio State made, like moving Jack and JT a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage instead of having them be in those wide 9 formations that they were spending most of the first half of the year in. Just those little things made a big difference. And I think that Larry Johnson deserves a lot of credit for being flexible and showing that he was willing to make some changes in the last half of the year. And so I wonder if, from a coach perspective, he's energized at the thought of getting to work with some fresh clay, because I think that that's probably one of the reasons why you continue to do this, even though, you just won a national championship. Your legacy as a coach is obviously well cemented, but there's a lot of guys that would have walked away after that situation. And he doesn't seem interested in doing that, which I think for the players in his room is great, because they love him and they want the opportunity to work with him. And so I do wonder if just getting the chance to mold some new players is actually exciting him a little bit.
Yeah. And maybe mold and use them in a different way. I think that's the other part, aside from just the roster. For me, Bill, it's like, well, Matt Patricia is here. Is it going to be more multiple fronts? It's not even a CJ Hicks Jack conversation anymore. It's like, is CJ Hicks just a defensive end? And what does that mean in this new regime and this new setup? And, when it comes to teaching pass rush and developing defensive linemen, I mean, Larry Johnson's been doing this forever, but there had been some, I don't know, stubbornness, it seemed at times. As Berm said, you give him credit for making the adjustments the way that they did last year to get the best out of those players and the best out of the defense as a whole. So he could do that too. He has shown that in a way that maybe in the previous couple of years Larry Johnson had not. It's possible that he might have to do that to a completely different and new level with Matt Patricia. Although I don't know, because we're expecting to hear from the coaching staff on Friday. But what does that look like for this new scheme, this new defensive coordinator? And then how does that apply to the Rushmen? I truly do not know.
Nor do I, but I do think there are things that line up to lead you in a certain direction, though. Like, for someone who probably trumpeted perhaps needing to be a little more versatile up front, I understand why they weren't with what just walked out of the building, right? You have to tailor the scheme to what you have. But now that those guys are out and going to the NFL, like, there's an opportunity based off just like different body types, but also numbers at certain positions that maybe you do become a little more versatile. Certainly that's in Matt Patricia's background. It's interesting to me that they're hiring a defensive line assistant in Tony Washington, who has experience in both 4-down and 3-down fronts. So yeah, I'm with you, Austin. Like, I'm not entirely sure, but if this is maybe the strongest I felt about there perhaps being a bit of a change there. And it's not, I don't think Ohio State suddenly scraps being a 4-down team entirely. I just think they become a little more multiple. Even like, look at Oregon, like they're not always one or the other. They just kind of like mix it up front. And I think if you look at what Matt Patricia's done, he's kind of done the same. And I think there's a chance that Ohio State can do that based off what it has coming back. So I don't know Ryan Day seems interested in it too. Maybe that's probably the most important place to start. He's mentioned it enough that like I'm certainly still on alert for it, but I can't tell anybody right now one way or the other what's definitely going to happen. I guess I would just say that maybe this feels like the most that door has been opened, kind of heading into an off season since we started having this conversation a couple of years ago.
Well, and last offseason, and even into October, Ryan Day was saying, we recruited to 4 down. We're playing 4 down. You have Jack and JT. It makes sense that you weren't going to make those dramatic or sweeping changes a year ago based on what you had recruited to. But Berm, if you zoom out and you look at the last few cycles for Ohio State on the defensive line, I'm not sure that you can make as strong of a case that they were like definitely recruiting to 4-3 and having 6 defensive ends on the roster, because the numbers don't match that.
I think they were trying to, but they didn't have the results that you wanted to be able to maintain that. And that's why I think it's actually, I was just going to mention, I think that there's a real chance we see some youth play for Ohio State this year, a lot more than we've seen in the past when it comes to the defensive line. Zion Grady, the defensive end from Alabama, is that prototypical body type, 6'5", 240 pounds. Epi Satanale, when he gets into campus in May, I think is a guy that has a chance to make some moves. There was a lot of people who thought he was maybe the best pass rusher on the West Coast this year, just as far as a pure rusher goes. And I think Jarquez Carter at defensive tackle is a name that people are going to need to be very familiar with by the time spring football is over, because he has the ability and quickness and the requisite strength to make an impact very early for Ohio State. So, when we talk about depth, we generally are speaking about the guys that are returning from last year. But when you add in these new pieces and in the new world of college football, these freshmen have to play. And I think you're going to start to see more and more of those guys get an opportunity. Now, to your point, when you only sign 2 defensive ends in a cycle like that is, it's hard to suggest that you're maintaining the build for a 4-3 long term, because quite simply, when you have guys like I mentioned, like Josh Mickens, et cetera, and now CJ Hicks, who's obviously played linebacker and is going to be a defensive end, but I don't know that he's a guy that you expect to step in and be a starter or anything like that. So they are going to have to move some things around. And again, I wish we had the optimism or confidence that we would see more of the spring football this year than I think we're going to see, because the way the season ended and everything else that has turned college football, spring ball into a NFL OTA style thing down the road. But I'm fascinated by what Matt Patricia and Larry Johnson are going to cook up, and I'm very excited for us to get a chance to talk to those guys on Friday for the first time.
Bill, what do you think is a reasonable expectation for CJ Hicks?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I would be probably tempered a little bit in my expectations. Like I do think moving him down to the D line just lines up better with sort of what his skill set is. So, but to Berm's point, like it's not like he's been doing this for a number of years, and depending on what they want to do with him, like there's a sophistication to it and a versatility that I think is required of any defensive end to be sort of an every down reliable guy like Jack and JT, where we've talked numerous times about how underrated those guys were as run defenders, and obviously they're good pass rushers. So I could see CJ Hicks being more of a specialist, like a sub package passing down kind of. There's not much more to this other than when you see that ball move, go take that quarterback's head off, and I think CJ Hicks would be quite comfortable with that role. So I am very much in favor of the idea of moving him down, but I'm also not. I'm not expecting him to be a guy who suddenly plays like 500 snaps defensive end, but if you can get him 250, and a lot of those are in passing situations, I think he can still find a way to be quite productive.
Ultimately, that's, I guess, where I have questions, or why I have questions about this defensive line heading into the spring. Like when you had Jack, JT, Ty, like those are your 4 down. Every down, those guys are out there. Outside of Kenyatta Jackson and Edric Houston and Caden McDonald, like I think the entire defensive line group for Ohio State are specialty players. They're special. They're guys who you put in circumstances and situational moments. Like I don't know that you have 4 or 5 guys on that group where you could feel comfortable playing them every down, and that is a significant change from what Ohio State has had in the last 10 years when you had the Taekwon Lewises and the DeBosas and the Youngs. And like you felt like, hey, if we don't have to take these guys off the field, we're going to be fine. And I don't know, even a guy like Caden Curry, who obviously brings a lot of really explosive energy and he's a dynamic rusher. And like, I think they bring in a guy like Logan George almost to split
to be Caden Curry.
To be Caden Curry against the run, because Caden Curry's not really designed to play against the run, and Logan George is. So I think you almost like you're splitting the baby a little bit with these guys and saying, okay, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, because there's not a lot of guys on this returning group that you know what you're going to get.
I think the three you named are right, but I would say that I would view Logan George and Jason Moore probably as guys who could get to the point of being every down defensive lineman.
I think Ohio State better hope they get there.
Yeah,
that's ultimately.
Yeah, it feels like Jason Moore is going to have that run stopping ability there that JT had for most of his career. I don't know about the pass rush ability. We'll wait and see. But you just add it all into this bucket of things that like don't really know the answers to. You'd think that with some of the body of work that we have with Caden and Kenyatta and even Edric Houston to some extent a year ago, you'd be like, well, you could feel really good about it and you project that forward. And I think you could do that, but it's also not a massive body of work. And so I think we would all agree that the potential was there, but like, does it reach 100% maximum efficiency this year, or does it fall short of that? And what does that mean for this defense as a whole? Like, it by no means is this supposed to come off as like a depressing amount of questions for Ohio State's defensive line. I just think that there are some, and if you're fairly looking at it, it's like it is not a certainty that they reach 100% or beyond, but they definitely could, and that would be exciting to watch.
I don't want and this is what I think unfortunately happens sometimes because we live in such a polarizing world. Questions are not inherently negative. Like just because we have questions about what this group means doesn't mean we don't think they can be good, or doesn't mean that we think Larry Johnson did a bad job. Like if you're looking at this fairly, you have to ask like, where's the production going to come from? Who's going to step up? Because they're going to need someone to step up outside of those starting three. Somebody else is going to have to really make a splash. And I don't even consider Caden Curry like a full-time starter heading into this year. I think that's the reason why you bring in a guy like Logan George. I feel very confident saying like his role is to be the second half of Caden Curry's personality on that offensive line or the defensive line. Like you're the pass rush guy, you're the run stop guy, and then we'll move you around depending on the situation. So it's not negative. It's just the reality. And I think they'll probably be pretty good because, as it turns out, Ohio State always recruits good players.
It does help. We are 2 weeks away from starting to get some of those answers. Again, as Berm said, I don't know how much practice we'll see. We've been getting a fair amount over the previous few springs under Ryan Day. They've got 15 practices, although the last one is the spring showcase. We saw about 5 last year. That was great. Hopefully we get that as well. But we'll find out as we get closer. By the end of the week, we're expecting to hear from Ryan Day and the coaching staff. Think that's tentatively scheduled for Friday. We'll be at Roosters later on today, which is Monday. So building up, ready for spring ball to get here now that March has officially arrived. Thanks for starting it with us on a Monday. Looking at the defensive line on the podcast daily. For Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham, I am Austin Ward. We'll see you guys later.